media, who is a columnist, a novelist, very outspoken, no stranger to controversy, so let's hope we get some of that coming up. And finally, Miss Manju Kapur, whose first novel, Difficult Daughters, won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and later book, The Immigrant, was of course shortlisted for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and she teaches, is this right, at Delhi University? You used to teach at Delhi University, okay. I'm a little bit behind the times. So, women on the verge. Well, the first thing I thought when we got the subject for this panel is women on the verge of what? You may be aware the original film title is Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. We hope not today, but as they said, emergency exits are to the side, so if a nervous breakdown happens, you know what to do. Women on the verge of, then what? Peril? I mean, we hear a lot about women being in danger, especially as far as the rest of the world is concerned. This is the main story out of South Asia these days. Perhaps we can have some comment on that coming up. But also women on the verge of achievement, perhaps. Things are in many ways improving for women in lots of parts of the world. So perhaps there's a positive spin too. Maybe even women on the verge of equality, although I think you'll notice that there isn't a Men on the Verge panel at this festival, so we are still pretty much considered a special interest group at some level. And certainly, let's just make clear from the start that none of us here can speak for all women. We won't be speaking for all women on the verge. What you'll get here is 4, maybe if I chip in 5 perspectives. So, what are we on the verge of? We need to start with you, Manju.
What are we on the verge of? I hope a better life. I hope better opportunities. Certainly in India, there is this feeling, and there has also been, as a result, some violence against women because of this, that women are taking their place more and more in the public sphere. So women on the verge, I mean, I don't like that. It's too kind of putting women in the box. But, I mean, speaking for myself and a novelist, this is my domain, talking of how women negotiate their private lives with their public lives. So whatever they are on the verge of, it is difficult. It is a process of negotiation. It is trying to come to terms and trying to take everybody else with you. So that's what, and then also the onus of taking everybody with you seems to lie with women. They're the ones who are blamed. Things don't, if men are feeling insecure or unhappy, it's the woman's fault. I mean, and there are, NGOs in India and equality groups and so on and so forth who are saying men should be looking at the way they respond as well. That there has to be some rethinking done on both sides.
If there are any men in the audience, you are going to come in for quite a lot of blame in this session, so just gird your loins now. Shobhaa, what are you on the verge of today?
On the verge of actually multiple things, which is something that defines women. They're never on the verge of any one thing. But I do wish we'd had a man on this panel just to get the balance right and a few perspectives in place instead of an all-female panel. But if you were to ask me what women are on the verge of, thank you. I would say they're on the verge of breaking free. And I like to see that in a very optimistic way. Even 5 years ago, I would have said they were on the verge of imploding. They were on the verge of desperation. But I do believe that in the last 5 years, there has been a change against tremendous odds and tremendous challenges, against death threats, danger, being killed just for being a woman and asking for that freedom. Whereas today, more and more women are recognizing what that freedom actually means. And it's taken a very long time for us to perhaps appreciate that what we really want above all else is that freedom which we should be able to take for granted as human beings. And that freedom is something so precious that every human being cherishes. There's nothing more in life. There's nothing that can liberate you, fulfill you, cherish you than freedom. So if you're asking me what my take is, I would say women are on the verge of breaking free and growing wings and flying high, and may they soar and soar.
For example, we also have a round of applause as well as for we should have a man on the panel for women should have human rights. Thanks guys, awesome, appreciate that. So next, Muneeza Shamsie, are you on the verge of something today? Oh no, hold on, we have no sound. Is it on? I'm not sure we can hear Namita.
Namita's comment on this is women on the verge of being silenced. Well, there's that problem also. We are fighting against those very great odds, and I don't think we need to be unaware. We are all aware of that danger, but actually what we are on the verge of, it seems to me, is there's a much, much greater acceptance of a woman's role in society beyond the home than I think there was before. Everyone talks about the 1960s, the glorious age. It was a very comfortable and it was a safer age, and for people like me who led very nice lives, it was very good. But in a way, but the whole bottom line was who will marry you, and if you get too educated, who will marry you, and if you do this, who will marry you? I mean, this is bottom line carried on, and I think today the concept of a girl going out, or all those jobs that the girls take for granted today, the civil service, you've got women pilots today, you've got women bankers, you've got not only, you've got women policemen, you've got women working behind the till, you've got women behind the counter. None of this was possible in the 1960s. There were very few women who were working, except for there were some privileged. And another thing, and I had a conversation with none other than Begum Liaquat Ali Khan, who did an enormous amount for women. But one of the things she said to me was that women today, when they want to go into welfare work, they're not going in it for free, and people criticize this. But actually, she said, it's a positive sign because they are wanting to be paid. To be paid is a means of empowerment. To be paid means that you're taking it as a profession. It's not a pastime. It's not a, by the way, that thing you're doing. And so I think we are on the verge of many more great things than most people realize.
I'm glad to see so many positive opinions. This is wonderful. And finally, Namita Gokhale.
Is this working?
No.
You're on the same problem as me.
More women being silenced.
Verge of silence.
Is that better?
Yes.
Much.
So, we've all said these brave things about being women, but I'm in a slight dilemma here because although I'm a woman writer, being a woman writer is a bit of a half-life because as a writer you're always struggling to be. Men, I don't think, struggle to be a woman writer, but all women do struggle to voice the larger concerns that seem to be sometimes excluded from the traditional periphery of a woman's writing. So, as a woman, I want to be part of that man's world, and at the same time, I have, at this late age, after writing, I don't know how many, maybe 8 novels and about another 5 or 6 books, I've come to the conclusion I am a woman writer somewhere. And so I'd like to say that for me, being on the verge is on the verge of reclaiming the earth. And the reason where this comes from, being on the verge of reclaiming the earth comes from actually the experience of the most powerful book I've ever written, which is not a personal book. I've written an anthology I've edited an anthology called In Search of Sita. And Sita is the Indian goddess who was exiled and sent to the forest when she was pregnant by her husband, and I always grew up thinking this is the most unjust thing in the world, and if any society takes this as a religious sanction, it's not on. We published a book on this 8 years ago, and everybody said, you're going to get into trouble for even trying to think or voice such things in a society that's increasingly, like our neighbors, silent about things that we shouldn't really be silent about. But that book hit a chord, and it's gone into many editions, and in small towns across India, we've shown films, read books, and in the last chapter of her life, Sita was made to go through a second chastity test, which she refused. She did it, and then she refused, and she returned to the earth. So for many of us Indian feminists who don't take the Western feminist men in suits, women in suits kind of look, Sita is the image of somebody who is now not returning to the earth but reclaiming her rightful place here. So on the verge of breakthrough, I'm sure.
But this is a remarkable amount, as I say, of positivity coming from this panel, which is actually delightful to hear, and I very much hope you're all right, and I also agree. But there are problems facing women. For starters, the fact that we are categorised as women writers. We're expected to be accountable not just as writers, but for the whole of women in a way that men aren't. You know, we would be judged on that, I think. Do you think that's the case, Shobhaa?
I don't like categories like I'm a woman writer, just like a man doesn't have to say I'm a man writer. So I don't see why gender should come into it at all. That there is a strong female perspective in whatever we write, just as there would be with men writing even about women. The male voice will seep through, does come through, and I don't see the need to specifically draw attention to ourselves as somehow flying the flag for our gender in a way that is self-conscious. You write what you have to write. You write the truth. You write because you believe in what you're saying. You write not as someone who's in a kind of missionary role to change and transform lives. I mean, you're essentially very often telling stories. If in the process you do touch lives, that's a bonus. But the minute you put yourself on that sort of a platform, that kind of a pedestal, and start thinking that you're going to transform the lives of women, and women writers are going to be seen differently because of what you have done, what you're saying, what you've written, I think it just, at least for me personally speaking, it's not my stated objective at all. So I believe that women should write without that one even subliminal thought that I'm writing as a woman. No, you're writing as a writer. And the minute we start thinking of ourselves minus those biases, minus those prejudices, not only will we be freeing ourselves, but we'll be freeing others too from viewing us through that filter. And that's very important, because it's these filters that in the end start acting against women's interests. So I'm against any kind of a filter that puts me in any kind of a ghetto and says and labels me, yes, you're a woman and you're a writer, so you are a woman writer.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to ask.
I mean, I just want to say, I mean, I absolutely agree with Shobhaa. It's really annoying being called a woman writer and men are running around being called writers. My publishers tell me you should be happy you're a woman writer because 70% of fiction readers are women, and maybe it's a marketing ploy, I don't know. And maybe it's a marketing ploy that my covers are pink and that there's jewelry on them, and I object violently to every single cover I've ever had. But marketing says, no, this is what will sell, and 70%, etc., etc. So you're kind of slayed by these figures. You don't know how much of it is, you know. I mean, I'm really happy here that as many men came to ask me to sign my books as women. And sometimes I think that, is this a way of keeping men out? What is my readership? Why is it seen like this? What is the perception? Why am I being marketed like this? All these are questions that, I mean, I have no answers to, because my publishers, who are usually male, seem to hold some secret key, and they don't, you know, they don't allow you in that sense. And I mean, I've been struggling against this ever since I've begun to write, and I've made no headway. I mean, this is
a bit of a problem because, I mean, although I think all of us probably have a lot of sympathy with what Shobhaa said, that it's not just us putting ourselves in that box. I mean, I fortunately am blessed with a man's name. I sound, according to many of my readers, they expect me to be an old German man, which is remarkably useful as a historian, because it's not thought that women write history at all. If they do, it's supposed to be about fashion or queens or mistresses. I instead write about men and guns and war. So, that's a surprise to them. But, so it's quite useful for me to be confused with a man, and actually I didn't have a cover photo on the first edition of Indian Summer for just that reason. J.K. Rowling doesn't have a middle name. The K was invented because they thought boys wouldn't buy Harry Potter if she called herself Joanne Rowling, which is her real name. So, it isn't just on us to change this, although I absolutely agree that we should be as bold as we can.
Yes, I agree with you that, to think of yourself or define yourself as a woman writer, I don't think you really think like that when you write. But I think the problem is, as Alex says, it's a problem of how I got this article which I couldn't believe it the other day in The Independent. A well-known German painter had made this wonderful declaration. He said women can't paint. And he wrote off everybody. All the well-known women painters, he had just written them off. Well, what does he mean by this? Excuse me. So if you're a woman writer, you are bound to react to this. This kind of definition. It's not what you're doing or being put into a slot. But when these kind of statements are thrown at you, you are perforce... you're forced rather to stand on your feet and say, excuse me. If you see early assessments of women writing, and there is this famous book that is the History of English Literature, which was taught in our colleges until the end of the 20th century, and it's unbelievable the way, the Brontes were spinsters, and George Eliot was jilted, and Mrs. Browning was, Elizabeth Barrett, but, and Virginia Woolf was one of the better women writers, but the great writer, of course, was D.H. Lawrence. And the whole marginalization of women in this narrative was extraordinary. If it's a male writer, you don't discuss that he was jilted by so-and-so, or that he was a bachelor living by himself on the moors, and it's not considered a bad thing to be a bachelor living on the moors anyway. But to be a spinster living on the moors, well, goodness me. So, these attitudes have not died down, the feminist revolution notwithstanding. And these are things that writers and critics have to face. And that's why I think that this whole marketing slot is all wrong, but it is a dialogue and a discourse that's important, and that's why I think the Orange Prize is important. And by the way, incidentally, you also see this in juries. It's done subconsciously, but it's very clear often that the books that the women like, the women judges, there's always a debate and sort of, are not always the one that the male judges pick out. Also not a universal truth, because some men and some women are much more sort of open to the others. But this distinction is there in the perception of the literary world, and it is a perception that needs to be disposed of.
May I just add one thing in continuation of what you said? V.S. Naipaul very famously said the same thing when he said he can tell from the very first line of a book whether a woman had written it. And the reaction to that was, I thought, ridiculous. I said, well, good for you. That shows high intelligence if you can actually see that there's a woman who's written that first line. But a lot of women took it as an affront. I thought the best response to it would be to mock it and to put him in his place. If he thinks we expose ourselves so brilliantly in the very first line, fantastic and good for us.
Absolutely, and I'd like to say the response to chauvinist men that is best is very often to mock them, so I couldn't agree more.
So,
Ms. Namita Gokhale,
I could bring some nuance into this, because I like to be contrarian in my own quiet way, and in fact, for my last three books and novels have tended to be more and more women-centric. And we all writers have a spiel, and that's the spiel we deliver most easily. And the one I've got right on top of my head is one called Chronicling Women, and how I have actually come back reluctantly to the fact that I am a woman writer at some level. At some level, women do read differently, they do write differently, they observe differently. And this came to me most clearly when I did a book called Mountain Echoes, where I chronicled the lives of 3 grandaunts and a grandmother. And it showed that there's more of an interior life. But actually what really effectively draws the line between what men can write about and what women can write about in many parts of the world is writing about sexuality. That is the magic line where you are not supposed to cross it. And in the Hindi world, just last year or 2 years ago, there's a writer called Pushpa Maitri, who's a very respected senior writer, and another senior vice-chancellor of a university, while reviewing her book in Hindi, said she writes like a chinal. And a chinal is a lady of easy virtue. And he said all women write these days like women of easy virtue. And there was an outrage, and he actually had to resign as the vice-chancellor of this university. But the point is that I think many women, it's often perceived that, oh, women write a lot about sex. And there is, I found, a distinct difference between how men write about sexuality and how women write about sexuality. And I think the reason is that for many of us, our bodies don't belong to us. Our bodies, at some level, belong to our husbands, our sons, our families, not to the state, thankfully, but and so reclaiming, thinking about your body as your own body and the possibilities of what you can do and not do with your own body are really the first step to reclaiming your mind and having that freedom in your mind that because you cannot have freedom of the mind without at least an imagined freedom of the body. So I think, and it's no joke that some of the most brilliant writing about the body and about their own bodies has been by some very brilliant Urdu writers like Ismat Chugtai, and well, that's what I have to say.
Although I don't in any way want to stop us talking about sex, and I'm quite happy to do that more, I do want just to pick up quickly on the point you made about interior life away from that, because I think that's really fascinating. It also came up in what Muneeza was saying, that actually, you know, there is a way in which the novel is actually a feminine art form. Certainly that's how it's been considered in the West for a long time, that actually because it was domestic and about, you know, love or things that were considered to be in that sphere, there was a long period in the West where that was considered, you know, womanly. So George Eliot wrote, so Jane Austen wrote, and, you know, men did more manly things like non-fiction or poetry. And so perhaps is there a way in which, in fact, women writers are the writers, and we shouldn't cede this ground at all? Manju Kapur, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, when you said the novel started in England, there was, I mean...
No, I'm not meaning to diminish other traditions of the novel.
No, but because I've been an English teacher, I also know, unfortunately, colonial heritage.
Sorry about that.
This is the stuff I know. So these books, Pamela and Clarissa, written by Samuel Richardson, were all these letters, you know, as you said, detailing their interior lives. And even when men took to writing novels, they often did it through, you know, with female protagonists, and they wrote about them. But coming back to this issue of sexuality, I was a teacher in Delhi University for about 30 years, and I thought that sexuality and your feelings about your body extend way beyond, I mean, seeing students, young women, between 18 and 21 for over 30 years. The idea of sexuality and who owns your body is something that's so intrinsic, not only to any romantic life or sexual life or married life, but daily life. Can you look at someone? Can you laugh? I remember one student telling me that, ma'am, I'm not allowed to look out of the window. I mean, to me, this seemed somewhat excessive. But, you know...
What was out of the window? Was it...
Because she was showing herself.
Oh, my goodness.
She was showing herself. She was perhaps lending that she, you know, she could be brazen, she could be inviting attention. Anything becomes nothing then is innocent. There's no innocence in this, and that also means that as a woman you can be penalized for any crime, real or imagined. And I think, you know, at least as a fiction writer, what I try and do is draw attention to these these kinds of attitudes, it's nothing, I mean, I can't fix it, but I'd like to. But I can show that they exist and what you do about it, and just bring, I mean, I think a novelist has and we are women and we are writing, and we have this, I mean, at least I have one of my agendas, if I can speak of it in those terms, is drawing attention to these issues or these conflicts that our society is ridden with. And just to, you know, if anybody reading them, you're aware of I mean, my third book, Home, is in a very conventional setup in Karol Bagh and trader class where education is not important, but how a woman is perceived, the color of her skin, the clearness, how fair she is, how this and that. I mean, the whole thing is around the way she looks. It's nothing about the way she is. It's the way she looks from beginning to end. And of course, this girl then gets eczema, which is supposed to be a big metaphor. But as I said, I think that's part of our responsibility to create awareness about these issues.
Shobhaa, do you feel that you have a responsibility to create awareness around women's issues, or do you just ride across it?
Well, when I write my columns, and I've been writing on gender for over 30 years, in a column called The Sexes, it so happens that most of the columns in that particular format are pro-women. But I have always supported a man if he's under the same kind of situations, if he's the underdog, if he's getting the worst end of any situation, I would have done that too. And pointed out that where women are going wrong in the way they are dealing with very sensitive, changing, socially volatile situations, where there's a lot of confusion, even as far as men are concerned. Having said that, the responsibility as a novelist is something totally different. I feel a novel writing fiction frees you from a lot of taboos. So when I did write my very first novel, Socialite Evenings, which was way back in, I think it was 1989, 1990, and it caused it just caused a huge sensation, because that very important taboo had been broken, where the woman in the first person is talking to her own body, about her own body, and about how she feels in a sexual relationship, with her husband, outside of marriage, within herself, with a same-sex partner. And the response was not so much, it was not an explicit book. The subsequent books were very explicit in seeing sex from a woman's point of view. Because by then I felt resentful. I said, this is really ridiculous. Because through centuries, women have been told by men, through their writing, through sculpture, through art, through various forms of self-expression, what we ought to feel about our bodies and about sex. So sexuality has always been conveyed to the whole world through a man's point of view and a man's perspective. And nobody has really bothered till very recently, to even engage a woman and ask her what she feels about her body and about sex. So the response to that first book, I realize so many years later, didn't have anything to do with the sexual content per se, because there's very little of it. It was really the subtext. It was about a woman wanting to use Namita's wonderful line, to reclaim her body, to have sovereignty over her body and her mind, and everything else about her person. That seemed to have upset a very conservative society in India. And of course, for me, I got a private giggle out of it with my slightly wicked sense of humor, that what they found most offensive is that the woman walked out of the marriage, not because the man was abusive to her, not because he was a drunkard, not because he was an adulterer, but to me, it was a far worse sin. He was a bore.
Shobhaa, I get the impression you quite like upsetting conservative society in India, and long may you continue to do so. But Namita, is that your point? The word sovereignty came up there, and I think is that key to the point that you were making, sovereignty over your body and
That's the point I came to very much later. Shobhaa's novel came out, I think, in 1990, but in 1984 I had already managed to upset a whole load of people.
Good for you.
With my first novel, which was called Poirot Dreams of Passion. And I was just 26 when I wrote this book, and I didn't know better. And my father, he saw the manuscript, he said, I hope you've been discreet. And well, I don't do discreet very well. I didn't in those days. And it's now, this book has been in print for 30 years. And it's never been out of print. And 5 years ago, I did a sequel. And it was really sweet because the first novel was very uninhibited. And now that I'm a grandmother and I was about to be a grandmother, all my friends said, don't let us down, don't try to be now extremely coy about things. But I realized that I had changed and my values had changed and what the whole journey had taught me so much. And so that was in hindsight that I could say that what I was striving for then was sovereignty. Because when you're younger, you're looking, as Manju so beautifully put it, all writing is actually about looking out of the window, and you're all trying to look out of your own window and through other people's windows, which is what other people's novels are. So it's difficult to say. And the first novel, we must remember, was a novel called The Tale of Genji, the first ever novel in the 11th century by Lady Murasaki.
Exactly.
That is my favorite book, if that doesn't sound presumptuous. But at the same time, the greatest book ever written about a woman, I feel, was Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. And that's written by a man, but it gets into the interior.
Tolstoy
So there
liked
are
women.
no rules at all.
Yeah, I think Tolstoy genuinely liked women, as in not just, was a bit of a ladies' man, but really understood women in a way that, is pretty impressive for any writer, male or female. Muneeza, can I ask you if this is something that's also reflected in the kind of women's writing that you pick up on, this kind of contrast between sort of trying to even own your own body or own your own space, your own mind?
Well, yes, I think one of the things that comes out in women's writing is not only knowing your own space and not only knowing your own sexuality, but to want empowerment through, let's put it this way, a lot of men's novels, if a woman wants to escape a situation, or if she wants empowerment, the only way she's able to do this is by vamping someone. She goes and has an affair, she goes and seduces someone, all this kind of thing. In a women's novel, it's quite different. The sexuality is often there. Sometimes it's repressed, which is another dimension. I mean, people like Fahmida Riaz writes about women's sexuality beautifully. But in the women's writings, I have come across this sense of space, and the sense of self is very strong. I don't know what it is, but men's writing, well, to put it in a simple way, I was in a workshop once, and we were passing around anonymous bits of writing, and this was this enormously graphic sex scene was being passed around, and we were all supposed to comment on it. And I just looked at it and I said, this is clearly written by a man. And everybody said, well, how do you know? I said, well, no woman would feel like this. It was about a woman, it was written, from the woman's point of view. I said, there's no way that a woman would feel any of this. Or, the emphasis on looks and all sorts of strange things. Or it seems strange to me. I mean, they thought it was normal. So there's a very clear way of the way women write about sexuality and the way men write about sexuality. At least this is in my experience. I don't know what the others feel.
I think also, if I could just pick up, it's also to do with the fact that women are biologically different. Women are the ultimate creators. I mean, they have babies, so they have a different dimension of creativity. And another thing that's very, very important, I find, in women's writing, which is there in men's writing also. I mean, and every man has a woman in him, and every woman has a man in him, and so on. But the sense of sorority in women's writing, and what we seek is sometimes understanding and reassurance and learning. And there are at least 3 of us on the panel who have at some level written about our mothers or grandmothers, or had books about them. I mean, just yesterday, Muneeza gave me a beautiful book by of Begum Jahanara Habibullah, her mother. And that book talks about a woman's life in those days. And when you read it, I was very moved, because you learn something from the lives of other women. Or Manju's brilliant book, which I read and reviewed so long ago, her first book, Difficult Daughters, looks at the figure of a mother and a daughter, and what are the things that hold us together and what are the things that change. Because somewhere writing is allied to gossip, and sitting near a well in the old times and washing clothes and listening to the other person and learning from the wisdom of the other. So I think there's a lot of women's wisdom in retracking our lives, our mothers' lives, the lives of those around us. And that's a very important part of getting our orientation in women's writing.
Yeah, I think when I read women, I feel a sense of recognition that I often don't barring Anna Karenina, that I often don't when I read men. I remember when I read Paro Dreams of Passion, everybody said, there was this very daring book, there's this sexy book, how could she have done it? I heard all kinds of things before I read that book, and when I read it, I was even disappointed. I thought, what are people talking about? Why are they saying why are they saying, What I did feel when I read Paro Dreams of Passion was a sense of recognition, that here's this woman talking about an Indian urban woman's feelings, her sexuality, her passion. I just felt, I felt, wow, this sense of recognition. And that's what I feel. I mean, if we claim, to use Namita's term, if we reclaim, I don't know, mainstream or whatever, but I'm talking about female experience, yes, because we need to read about it. And I feel, particularly with subcontinental writing, I feel empowered when I read about women like me, when I read about women who have the same names, who have the experiences, who have the same kinds of conflict. I feel a sense of familiarity, of recognition, that in some way empowers me. Many people have said to me that, and this surprised me, for example, young Asian women in the US or in the UK, that I was writing about them. I mean, I was really startled. I thought, if I'm writing about you, you have a problem. But whatever it is, I guess they were talking about the restrictions they felt in their homes and so on and so forth. So that's why I feel that our writing is extremely important, because in our writing, we voice experiences that are so common and need more voices, need more strength, need more recognition. That's what I feel is, never mind the label, or, if it's there, one day we'll be seen as so mainstream that men's writing will be called men's writing, and our writing will be the writing.
Yeah, they can have a little panel. Shobhaa, can I just ask you, because I think there were a couple of points in there that I sort of want to pick up on, actually. And you're talking about a universality of experience that's very interesting. And of course, there's a gender element to that and there's a race element to that, and both of those are kind of factors in it. But do you feel, Shobhaa, that there is a kind of experience that women over the world can share through their writing?
Absolutely. Just the thought of women without borders is a very appealing thought. So a lot of it has to do with universal feelings, and like Namita said and Manju also commented, at the end of it all, it links up to something very primal. It has a lot to do with, yes, being mothers. I'm a grandmother myself. The sense of continuity, the sense of sharing, that because the experiences, no matter where you come from, the universal experience of women is something that is always, it's stupefying, like she said, that people in the US or elsewhere relate to it without having lived it, but you instinctively know. So that intuition is a shared intuition. I'd like to call it the female intuition, which doesn't recognize which city you come from or whatever else your baggage may be. And when it comes to sexuality, again, that's a very powerful cementing factor. When women can talk about it freely amongst even themselves, it liberates you in a way that it's astonishing and at the same time delightful. Because for years and years, it was just something that was not allowed. You couldn't talk about sex. Who could you talk about sex to? I mean, when you ask yourself in a conservative society, you couldn't do it with your mother. You couldn't do it with, you could do it with a naughty, young, friendly aunt, perhaps. No one was prepared, no one was trained, even before marriage and girls getting married to strangers at a very young age. No one told them what to expect after marriage in terms of the sexual relationship. Today it's a very different world. I can discuss sex with my daughters in a responsible way, not in a chummy, hey, so what did you do last night way, but in order to sort of keep them on course and to know and not be in denial. The thing is, for, say, my mother's generation, it was a topic that seemed so scary to deal with, that everybody was in denial. No one wanted to talk about sex. It was so taboo. And yet, I mean, here we're talking about, everyone keeps saying that, oh, but these are such mixed signals that come out of India. After all, you're the land of the Kama Sutra. I mean, come on. The Kama Sutra, A, was written by a man, and B, it was centuries ago, and C, it was a complete con on the rest of the world. You try any of those asanas, you're likely to break your neck, your knees, your back.
That explains a lot, and you can take it up with my osteopath. I think we would like... Let's take some questions from the audience. I'm
I'd
sure
like to just add one thing.
Oh, sure, of course. Now, let me just take this from Namita. Yeah.
To what Shobhaa said.
Sure.
She said there was nobody to talk to, but in society it rarely happens that there's nobody to talk to. And so there was an alternative channel, which was folk tales and folk songs. And if you remember, that was really the purpose of before the wedding, the women get together, they sing the songs, and if you really deconstruct the songs, there is so much of instruction, advice, and wisdom in those. I mean, that because human beings do always find ways, but that was a very oblique and difficult way to do things, and also a very joyous way to sit across most this part of the world. You sit with a dholak and you sing songs and really instruct the younger people through that. You can't forget that.
Well, can I just add just one extra? Now, we've been talking about the subcontinent mostly, but because I had a strange upbringing, I grew up in England. I was sent there when I was sent there when I was 9.
As upbringings go.
Well, you know, I had a strange upbringing. I grew up with these English families. Frankly, I don't remember sex being discussed anywhere. I mean, I don't think it was something that most of my friends discussed with their mothers. It was very much, I mean, this is before all that, you know, 1960s and whatnot, what was supposed to be the Great Revolution, which was very disturbing to a lot of families I knew. And there was a kind of, and the kind of books that the girls of 15 or so were reading in Pakistan, they were reading things like patent plays, which at my school was banned. I mean, no parent would allow their daughter to have that book in the house. At school, you would be, God knows, they expelled a girl for reading Lady Chatterley's Lover, for God's sake. So, this kind of talking, and I think within traditional Parda society, actually, I think we've got sort of kind of layers of different things happening. I think in traditional Parda society, there was a much greater awareness and openness about sexuality within the Zanana. I mean, than there is now. I might be wrong about that.
So, okay, if we can take the audience, and the questions don't have to just be about sex. We are talking about women.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
You can, and they have other parts than just those.
Is it on? Hello to everyone. My name is Yagur Chani, and I've especially come from Karachi to attend this festival. I'm very, very impressed by what came out of this panel. All 5 of you, very enlightening, and what I felt was the wisdom behind what you said. I am a fellow writer, and my first book, In the Ruins of Solitude, surprisingly had a collection of short stories, and every protagonist was a woman.
Very good.
And it was not planned. And Muneeza, who I love to bits, I adore this woman, she was the first one to go out and buy this book. And what I don't understand is why women spend so much energy fighting and trying and striving to beat the men. I'm not a misogynist. I'm not. All the power for women. I will stand by you for your feminism. I'll support you. But why don't women celebrate their feminine gender? Why don't they, what would be a woman? Okay, you beat us men to whatever field or whatever technology. What happens? One fine day you become a man. And then where is that beautiful woman who's a mother, who's a sister, who's a girlfriend, who's a fiancée, who's a wife? So my question is...
You said you weren't a misogynist. I'm having real trouble reconciling that with what you just said.
I'm not. But women are such an essential element of the globe.
So you think we're great in our place? I get the point.
I'll reply to
yes,
that.
Please.
So I appreciate your question, but I think here we were talking about writing as women. And No, but the answer, because this is a literary panel, and we were saying that as women, when we write as women, we don't want to write only within the zenana. We also want, as women, to have the experience of looking out, because a good writer is both a man and a woman. So I think the attempt there was to look out of that window and look at the larger world, whether it's a man, a woman, a flying butterfly, but to embrace greater experience than a limited one, I think.
And the minute we have a level playing field, sir, then the fight that you object to, there'll be no fight at all. We'll be equals. So, till that point, yes, it's worth every bit of the fight.
There's a question.
Yep. Hold on.
Who's got a mic?
We've got a microphone just down here. Okay, hold on. This lady here,
just
and then we'll come to you.
Just make sure they have mics.
Yep.
Alex, we need a mic.
Yeah, I think we need a mic. Yep. I'm sorry, we'll come to you in a sec.
It works, yeah. In response to this gentleman from Karachi, much that I appreciate his appreciation of the female role and the gender, but, over the years, I have realized that there's a fear embedded in men, and it is that fear, it has nothing to do with Freud and all those things. It's just my general observation, being a teacher, a mother, that you see, if it's the case of subversion, right? The one who has been oppressed would become the exact replica of the one who oppresses. So it is a game of actually putting people down, whether they are women or they are other minorities. So I think women have a right to find an écriture, a writing for themselves that defines them as women, as powerful entities. And as far as the sexuality and taboos and all those things are concerned, I feel that partly the responsibility lies with us women. As a mother, if I bring up my sons from day one and instill in them the basic respect for womanhood, then they will respect women and their sexuality.
I'd just like to say, yes. On that point, Kamala Shamsie, who's just down here, we had a session with earlier, and she said, I think it's a very good point, that patriarchy is the oldest and most pervasive of empires. So perhaps there's something in there to inspire us all. Would anyone else like to respond?
They should ask us.
Sorry.
Okay, can we go to the next question?
Do you think all this emphasis on women writer and all this talk about women comes from the fact that women talk about it too much? Like, for instance, Women's International Day. My 13-year-old son said to me last year, he actually tweeted, he said, I don't see the need to have a special day to respect women. Women should be respected every day. Why are we even talking about respecting women? or any gender. What I'm trying to say is, if all of you believe that you write about A, B, C, and D, and all those are domains that only women tackle and only women talk about, unlike you, as you said, that you write about a different subject, I don't think there should be any justification or explanation, you should not even be.
I'm sorry, man. I don't think you've got the facts right. I don't think all of us write only about things that women write about.
I didn't
that
say,
is not accurate.
I don't mean that. I mean, I'm a great fan of.
All of us write about very different subjects.
Yes, but the thing is, all I'm saying is that since they're